Beth Willis. Thank you for joining us tonight, Beth. So I will turn it over to you. Maybe you can give us some background on the Board of Registrars and what you have for open positions, and then introduce each of the applicants, and we'll discuss and then vote.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me here tonight, and I really appreciate you taking the time to consider this at a work session. I know it's a little unorthodox. So basically, we have a perfect storm kind of a situation with the Board of Registrars. Normally, we have a very steady board. It rarely changes, but we have a situation where I had an open position for quite a while, and I was working with the town committee to get an applicant for that position. They had given me an applicant, and I hadn't gotten that person in front of you yet when suddenly I had a resignation of a second registrar who was moving out of town right at the point where earlier this week, where Brad Hill's seat vacancy in the state representative, they were turning in nomination papers to me. So that deadline was coming up this week, and suddenly we had a resignation. So I find myself in a situation where I need to be able to certify these papers so that people can get their names on the ballot and democracy can continue. So the town committees were responsive when I sent out the word for another candidate. And so now, in addition to the first candidate, I have a second candidate. So we are able to bring them to you tonight to hopefully have them approved, and we can continue our business. So the first seat apparently that we're going to talk about is Janet Wilkins. She is she's been a long-time resident of Topsfield. I've had an opportunity to meet with her and talk with her a little bit, and she seems very enthusiastic about the position. So I'm excited to have her on board. And you have her background information, her volunteer application, and a little bit of background information I put together about her in your packets for this meeting tonight. But Janet is very active in the COA. She's a Meals on Wheels driver for another town. She's been a lifelong resident, and she's really ready to jump in and head first and just, be there for me and get things rolling and do whatever we need to have to do.
Great, thank you. I think Janet is with us. Would Janet like to say a few words? Janet, can you hear us?
I can, and I'm just unmuting myself here. And, thank you for this opportunity. I am very enthusiastic. I started getting into the Democratic Committee in just the past few years, and I enjoy it. I like to help people. Some part of what I didn't put on the application was that, for instance, I've helped a lot of the seniors because I live in Little Brook, and I printed out many of the applications to help them get to vote online and things like that, or vote by mail and stuff like that. And I'm just interested in the process. I keep learning. I keep applying to different workshops, and I just find it fascinating. I will never be a politician, and I will never be a candidate, but I do enjoy watching it and participating in any way that I can.
Great, thank you, Janet. Does the board have any questions for Janet?
Well, Janet, glad to have you with us. Glad you volunteered. But think of all the fun you're missing not being a politician.
Well, that might be, you never know later. I mean, I might change my mind, right? It's a woman's prerogative, right?
Good to have you with us. Thank you, Janet.
Thank you.
Thank you for stepping up. But I do have a question. It actually goes to Beth, because I'm not as steeped in the statutes as I should be, perhaps. but the registrars typically are certainly separated from any political positions. What is the reading about positions within organizations within the town municipal government, Beth?
Well, I don't believe they are supposed to hold any other positions on any other boards or committees within the town. And they usually don't work at elections as an election worker either. The thought being with that in case there's a recount, the Board of Registrars are the ones that actually do the recount. So
the point that you're making, and that's the clarification for me, is, and I thought that was the case, it only relates to other elected positions within the town. It does not relate, for example, to appointed committees such as the Council on Aging. Is that true? I'm asking it as a question.
I'm not sure if there's the distinction between appointed or elected. I would have to look into that. I can get back to you on that. I don't think that there's a case that I don't believe Janet is she's not on the COA board.
She is not on the COA board.
No.
Well, I can see a distinct difference between a registrar running for an elected position versus willing to serve as an appointed member of the COA, for example.
We just have to understand the statute, Boyd.
Yeah, I understand.
So let me ask this question to Janet. Janet, do you have any problems if the statute requires that you not be a member of, for example, the COA, to resign from that position effective when your appointment becomes effective? And Beth will be the one that will check on that for you. But
Dick, I can state that she's not on the board.
She's
Dick,
not
I can
on the
state
board, Dick.
she's not on the board. I am on the COA board,
Okay.
and Janet is not.
Are you on any committee or board then? I didn't remember seeing it in the application, so I didn't think of it, but the subject came up of you doing things with the COA. Are you on any committees or boards?
I'm involved in the Democratic Committee, the Town Democratic Committee, but that's as an associate member, but that's it.
And that's different. That particular one is a separate thing because you are ideally a member of one of the town committees. Great. Thank you.
Could we have a motion, please?
Motion to appoint Janet Wilkinson to a registrar of the town of Topsfield for a period beginning today and extending to June 30th, 2023.
It's Wilkins, but
No, yes, her name is Wilkins.
Janet Wilkins, yes.
Right.
Excuse me.
And
Thank you.
it's an unexpired term for 21 months, as you said, Dick, ending June 30th,
I'll second
2023.
that.
Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll go to a roll call. Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Brown?
Aye.
Mr. Hook?
Aye.
Mr. Gant?
Aye.
And Ms. Bermudez is aye. It passes unanimously. Congratulations, Janet, and thank you for stepping forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, Janet.
Thank you, Janet.
You.
Beth, now do you want to speak to Michael Fahey?
Sure. Unfortunately, I don't think Michael was able to join us tonight due to his work schedule. I believe he is qualifying his officers at the shooting range tonight or today or something. So he was not able to make it. But I've had a chance to also meet with him. He seems like he's very warm, very unassuming, very confident. And I think he's going to be a great addition to the board as well. He actually grew up in Medford, and so he has a background. His father, I believe, was was the elections officer. And if you probably saw his resume, he had a very extensive resume that I put in the packet. And his father was an election officer in Medford for many years. So when we started talking about the election process and certifying papers and elections, and also from his his work as a police officer, he's worked elections, so he's very familiar with the process and the rhythm of how things go and the necessity to the deadlines and getting things done. So I think that he's going to really be a great addition to the team. So he's been a resident in town since about 2012, and I already talked about how he grew up in Medford. But the other thing that I learned about him was that he has an antique car, a specific antique car that some of you may have seen him driving around town. I think he told me, and I hope I'm not wrong, but I think he told me it's like an older cruiser. I forget what the vintage is of it.
An old what?
I think it's a cruise. I think it's a police car. Yeah. So I don't know. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. So I don't know if anyone who's a car person has seen his antique car around. And he talked about how he does some of the shows that people do in the summertime where they have the meetups of the different cars at different places and whatnot. He's always kind of asked to bring his, and he's sought after, so to speak. So that's just an interesting little tidbit.
Great. And for those who maybe are not looking on board docs, Michael is a lieutenant with the Medford Police Department. He's been there for, over 20 years, I believe. So could we have a motion for Michael, please?
Motion to appoint Michael Fahey to the Topsfield Board of Registrars for a period beginning today and extending to June 30th, 2022.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll go to roll call. Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Brown?
Aye.
Mr. Hook?
Aye.
Mr. Gant?
Aye.
And Ms. Bermudez, aye. It passes unanimously. So congratulations to Michael. And thank you, Beth, for getting those slots filled and moving ahead on the special election.
Right. Who knew I was going to have elections this fall? So thank you very much. This is a big relief to me. And we've got the signatures have, the papers have come in and we've been working on the signatures. So this was just the last little tidbit I needed, and we can get them all finish certifying them and get them back to the candidates so they can get them into Boston on time. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you. And
Thanks.
Enjoy the rest of your conference.
Thank you.
Thank you, Beth.
Thank you.
Bye, Beth.
Bye.
Okay, moving on. Our next item is the Pond Street Culvert. So I am looking to see, I think we have Water Superintendent Greg Crom and Highway Superintendent Gary Wilds with us tonight. Is Greg under Victoria? Is that Victoria Crom?
I'll bet it is.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
So, Kevin, I'll turn it over to you to start the discussion, explain the project, and then pull in Gary and Greg as you see fit.
Excellent. Thank you, Madam Chair. I also recognize Heidi Gaffney, who's on the call as well, from our is our Concom agent, as well as members from the Ipswich watershed folks, Wayne Gasaway and Neil Shea. So last meeting we had on the agenda this item on Monday. This project, just as an overview, has been something that we were approached on almost 2 years ago in an effort to try to improve the access for the spawning fish that make their way up the different passages ultimately to Hood Pond. And by doing so, improving some of our infrastructure, specifically a culvert at Pond Street, which is located right at the end of Hood's Pond. And during that time, Wayne and his team had taken a number of efforts to move the project forward, from design, obtaining funding, and the proper approvals at different levels. More recently, we had a chance, our team to take a look and do further analysis and review of the material that was submitted. We think this is a great project. If we can get there, but one of the things we want to obviously look for is the whole of it. holistically and what the impacts could be potentially, both positive and potentially negative. And then if we can clear the ones that are negative, it's a really great opportunity for the town, as we have a $480,000 project fully funded from grant sources, which is pretty phenomenal. And a number of members of the community, Friends of Hood's Pond and others, who are very supportive of the project. But more recently, we've been diving a little bit deeper and crunching some numbers, and I'll let Greg speak to that in a few minutes. But we are grateful for all the work that Wayne and his team have performed to date, and the opportunity to share with you tonight a little bit more detail about the project. I would also just mention that a significant component of this is the timeline, which maybe Wayne, you can speak to a little bit more clearly than I would. But there is a very short window at this point to move the project forward. But that said, we certainly want to make sure everybody feels comfortable with it before we take it up, presumably on Monday. So with that said, I'll turn it over to Wayne. And maybe, Wayne, if you want to give a little more detail about your process, and then we'll maybe turn it back over to Greg.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I'm really pleased and honored to present this project to you all tonight. And it was great to see so many of you yesterday at our other presentation. Feel we got to know each other pretty well. As Kevin indicated, this project has been a long time in coming, and we're excited. And its genesis was a comprehensive evaluation of all the culverts and dams in the town of Topsfield, as well as throughout the Ipswich, Parker, and Essex Rivers watershed. We did about 5 years ago, where we assessed all 75 culverts and dams in Topsfield. And this project immediately ran to the top because of the combination of ecological impacts and risk of flooding and infrastructure. And that formula really brought Pond Street to the top. And when you have the dual benefits, that opens the door to lots of funding, and where there's funding opportunities, that all those things together brought Pond Street really to the top of the pile. About 2 years ago, we partnered with Topsfield formally to move this project ahead and began to apply for funding. And as Kevin indicated, the project has already gone through the full permitting process. It's gone out to bid. As many of you know, in that price tag that Kevin mentioned, it probably seems shocking. In the old days, this might have been an in-house $20,000 project, and it's now $500,000. And the reason for that, and I'm sure many of you know, is the state about a dozen years ago created new what's called stream crossing standards, and their goal is to basically minimize or eliminate the impact of stream crossings on the ecology, while at the same time minimizing risk of failure and public safety, and particularly flooding, and created these standards that all cities and towns now have to meet. And so the permitting process is really three-tiered. First, the Conservation Commission. Secondly, the state and DEP. And then thirdly, and probably the most rigorous phase, is the funding program that supports the restoration of these culverts. And we successfully got through all of those permitting phases and processes. And those permitting really require you to meet two tests. One is that it doesn't impact the ecology of the stream, but as importantly, it doesn't affect downstream areas. It's illegal for Massachusetts to increase flooding downstream. So you have to really pass those two tests. And so there's been a bunch of engineering and review at these three tiers to get us to this point. As Kevin indicated, as part of some due diligence, some questions have more recently come about, and we're really happy to help do that due diligence, because our goal is, I'm sure the community's goal is, to make everybody comfortable with this project, because if everyone's happy with this and it's a success, it will really build momentum for the 75 other projects in town that eventually need to be done to improve our infrastructure and ecology. So there's a lot riding on this, and we just really want to do the right thing, hence this meeting and all that extra due diligence. I'd love to introduce you to Neil Shea, who's our restoration director and also Topsfield resident. And Neil, we're really excited to have Neil. I'm a lay person, but Neil is a fluvial morphologist, which is basically in layman's term is a river scientist. So we're really lucky to have Neil on staff, and he's here to really answer any of the technical questions. In addition to our consultants, we had a couple of renowned engineering firms who specialize in this work do all the modeling and analysis. Neil's also done some of his own as well. And just to really bring this back to the nutshell of why, one of the things we're here for tonight in particular, there was some question about what we described as the intermediate flows, because the high flows of big flood flows already come over top Pond Street. So those are already happening downstream. It's really the slight change in that intermediate flow level where there could be a slight increase in the rate of runoff. There won't be any more water flowing downstream. That's going to stay the same. But there's a question of, that increased rate of runoff. And Neil's done some further analysis with our consultants if we want to get into that nitty gritty to try to address some of the additional questions that have come up recently. And just to sum, this is our business. We've done dozens of these across the watershed and hope to do hundreds in the next decade or so. And we feel we've done more due diligence on this project than we've done to date now, and feel really good that it's going to be a great structure for the community, eliminate flooding, and last hundreds of years, and also be good for the stream and the pond. So with that, I'll stop with setting the stage. Again, Neil is here to answer any real technical questions. I'll turn it back to Kevin if you want to have some of your staff talk, or if we really want to get into the technical work with Neil.
Thanks, Wayne. Appreciate that. Neil, if it's all right, maybe we'll keep going and we get to some questions. Maybe that's the best part. But Neil's been an integral part of the last couple of weeks, especially, but I know he's been working on it for some time and helping us get a lot of the questions answered that the town proposed regarding this project. So I'll just kind of do, as Wayne said, I'm a lay person as well when it comes to this, but maybe I'll just give a little bit more from our perspective, then I'll allow Greg to talk about the technical side. One of the things that was done was analysis, which checked the boxes from the flow levels that would go. It's a 10-foot opening with the new culvert compared to what exists right now, which is 5 12-inch culverts that are sort of stacked at different heights to let water move as water rises during storms. One of them is actually 16 inches. And so in normal times, like today or tomorrow, when we don't have any significant rain, the 10-foot culvert, even though it's 10 feet, the way it's designed, will allow for the same amount of water to flow as it does today. The concern that the town had, and it was during storm conditions, unusual storm conditions, and the pond actually acts as a retainage pond in a sense, to allow for water to store in the pond rather than storing downstream. And so those are really our biggest questions was, okay, in a storm, what's the worst case scenarios? And so we asked Wayne and his team, and they were really great with a small window to try to make it happen, to do a further analysis of the pond, but also at 97, where the next culvert is, and slightly beyond that to see what the impacts are from that. And due to the timelines, that data was not able to become available to us. But, I promised to Wayne and the team and our team that we were going to keep walking down the path so we couldn't walk any further. And we think that in the last few days, I shouldn't say think, we're incredibly confident that we have a stopgap, a safety valve in a sense, to ensure that if the data that has been run, and which I believe, I don't want to speak for Ipswich River watershed, but the impact should not be increased substantially during storm conditions. But if there was a worst case scenario, if we're wrong, what's that solution? And so our team and Ipswich River watershed team, we put our heads together, and we're hopeful that we have a solution that we feel comfortable with, that can, if the data that we don't have, if that were to be done and proves different, or in actuality the water flows heavier than we anticipate, then what? And so that's where I'm going to stop pretending I'm a technical expert in this and hand it over to Greg Crom, who is a technical expert, to kind of get a little bit more into when he saw the data, what he thought, and then sort of what we've been doing recently to get to a comfort level. Greg?
Thank you. And apparently, I have not used this phone since my last piano recital for my daughter. Yeah, we started talking about this project, and we started looking over the engineering plans that were submitted, and the work that was done is standard for your normal culvert. This, because of the proximity of the pond, I felt that really the effect of pond storage on the flows leaving the culvert needed to be taken into account. There's a certain drainage area that feeds water to the pond during storms. As the storm approaches, the rain picks up, and then the pond level rises up. In the existing system, for a 100-year storm, it rises up quite a bit. It eventually overtops the road. But with the new culvert, the whole storm will pass through the culvert. So in the early parts of the storm, the capacity of the 5 existing pipes is quite a bit lower than the new culvert capacity. So the pond may rise up a couple of feet before the road overtops and the capacities equal out. So really what we were looking at was how much water is stored on the pond in a storm that comes close to overtopping Pond Street but doesn't. And what's the flow rate in the existing system under that scenario versus the new culvert. And to do that, it's a different type of analysis. You have to essentially apply a design storm over the drainage area, and it calculates the amount of runoff. You have some storage nodes that model the pond, and then some conduits and links for the culvert system. And my concern was that the design work that had been done significantly overestimates the flow through the 5 culverts during some of the design storms. Obviously, a 100-year storm, it's overtopped several times. So is more along the lines of a 5 to 50-year storm, what happens under those conditions that we were concerned about. One of the issues we ran into is because of the stream crossing standards, the culvert has to be a certain size. There's really no way around that. And we unfortunately didn't have enough time to do a full analysis of the hydraulics, including the storage effects of the pond. So what we decided, this is in combination with the Ipswich River Watershed Association, was to include some slots in the culvert on the upstream face of it to put in boards or some sort of restriction device so that the flow through the new culvert will be able to be throttled to limit downstream effects in case we ran into problems down the road. And it's really a temporary measure to put in when storms are coming, to prevent, to really use the retention capacity of the pond. And then once the storm passes and the pond level drops, the throttle plate would be removed. And then things would go back to normal. You'd have fish passage, you'd have animal passage through the culvert. And until really these stream crossing standards are applied, further downstream, practically all the way out to the river, the restriction plate would probably be needed during larger storms. I think there's in board docs, there's a kind of a quick and dirty diagram of what it would look like. What we had envisioned was kind of a bow tie shape where there's a steel plate that gets dropped in across the face of the culvert. There's a flow area in the middle down low that approximates the flow of the existing pipes. And then on the top, there would be a shallow V-notched weir so that in the 100-year storm, the pond level would rise, overtop the plate, and instead of spilling out of the pond street, it would stay in the stream channel. It would just go over the overflow on the throttle plate and continue out through the culvert and down to Route 97 and that 197. So it's, I think it's a good compromise. It's a good fail-safe. There's some regulatory things that will have to be done when it gets used. Involves filing an emergency certification with the Conservation Commission. And
pulled down a pants, bent him over the hood of the Mustang, and I'm fucking in the parking lot. Right over the hood of the fucking car. All of a sudden, everybody comes pulling in
Kevin,
the box.
could you mute Mike? Thank you. Go ahead.
So I think the idea of a throw, we originally talked about putting in boards, it's just stacking them up, but the boards, when you put boards into a culvert flow restrictor, they tend to be permanent. This way, the plate that drops down and doesn't really rest on the ground, it rests on some supports on the culvert, can be inserted at any time, and it can be easily removed without causing any damage to the stream bottom of the culvert. So we think that's the best option we have available. It would allow the project to go forward, and it provides a fail-safe in the future if needed.
Great, thanks. I just make one other point. The design that the initial design, less the plate, is the state standard. It is the standard. So we would be having this conversation regardless at a certain point. What if? Because we are increasing that size. But the team this morning, when we spoke about this in great length, felt very comfortable with this. Ultimately, creating the same dynamic throughout, whether it's normal conditions or storm conditions, we'll have the same amount of flow coming through, even with a wider mouth because of the fail-safe that we've created. I thought it might be helpful for Greg to just walk the board through, because this is for storm conditions, just to talk about his typical storm processes and how this would play into it, because it is going to be a human component to recognizing and then going forward to prevent flooding from taking place downstream, if in fact it does cause that in the future.
I'd like to make a comment if I might, for Wayne and Neil specifically. There are a number of us in town that have pretty highly regard for Greg Crom's capabilities and his ability to analyze issues, and so I'm inclined to listen to him pretty heartily, and that means that I want to hear from you guys about what you think about this proposal.
If I could jump in, Mr. Jackson, just before Neil, our technical guy, weighs in. I think this is a great compromise, and I think the scenario that has been described is incredibly uncertain, and I think it's that uncertainty we're trying to address. We feel 100% confident, as do all of our consultants, as do the 3 layers of permitting, because it's illegal to change downstream conditions, that the current analysis, as well as the interim analysis we did in the last couple of weeks, that there will be no significant change downstream. There's just really no opportunity to do that because of the current conditions. The pond, even now with the 5 culverts, does not rise 2 feet during storms. I grew up on the pond. There's very little change even now, so there'll be probably very little change going forward. And so the fail-safe, which we fully support and endorse, we think it'll never ever have to be implemented. I just think it's a great fail-safe, but all of our data and all of our analyses, as does our experts, feel that eventuality won't ever be necessary. And Neil, do you want to just add to that?
Sure. Yeah. I can just give a little background too. Like I have a lot of experience working on crossing projects and culverts. It was a big part of my career so far has been sizing culverts and doing watershed analysis and making sure that pipes are properly sized to convey the flows in which the watersheds that they're installed in. And this Pond Street project, I've really dived straight into, and there's been an exhaustive amount of work done on it, so much so that I can say with great confidence that I feel like the risks have been properly analyzed and put forth for all the reasons that Wayne and Kevin have already went through. It's gone through the proper permitting channels. I think Greg's, we tried to address Greg's concerns in our most recent memo, and I think we did a good job on a short notice, because I totally agree that that's an important thing to think about. This is, Hood Pond acts differently than a regular stream. So, but I think given everything we put into this, I feel very, very strongly about this culvert being the right size, the right shape. It's going to convey the right amount of flow, and it's not going to do damage to downstream infrastructure or resources. So I'm pretty confident in that.
I just have to jump in.
Go ahead, Wayne. I'm sorry.
No, I'm really sorry, but we work with Greg all the time on a normal basis, and we have the same respect for Greg. He's the best.
Well, it kind of sounds to me like we might all be in agreement here. Now, I know that Gary Wilds is sitting here listening, because the work at controlling this I don't want to call it a bow tie, because that doesn't quite say it. It's a gate, if you will, in my opinion. And Gary is the guy that's going to be responsible for putting the gate in and taking the gate out. So Gary, tell me a little bit about that. You okay with that? I don't see it as a big project, but it's just something else you've got to do.
That's the least of the worries, Mr. Jackson. It constituted in the conversations we've had, if this is acceptable or not. And I don't know enough about this. I'm the boots on the ground. I'd be the person watching the weather. If we were worried, we would have to go to a type of permit application for an emergency basis if this was going to be used. And then the design would have to be such that it would meter the water in its normal process as it currently goes now, which is Pond Street with granite culvert and 4 more pipes. The in and out of that is easy enough to take care of. Certainly it bears watching the weather, something just because of the amount of hours that we've spent on this now. I will never not watch the weather again in regards to the whole project. If I never hear the name, and I used to say this about Copper Mine, now I say it about Pond Street. So that going, the process of in and out, we have 2 different machines. The logistics of where the culvert edges are on the edge of road if a machine were tied up or down, I have a secondary that could put it in, and it would drop into place and act as our weir as we discussed it. The rest of the other stuff, I know I've learned an awful lot with all this. Those are things where I rely greatly on, Greg, our other consultant, Mike, and for that matter, Wayne and Neil. In what is right and what is wrong with this. One of the things I felt was, no matter who's right or wrong here, do we have an opportunity to make a fail-safe in case somebody's wrong, to protect the town of Topsfield? And that was my biggest concern. What could we do to, if we needed to in the last second, we had a 100-year storm and something came up, could we put it back to the way it was suddenly for an emergency basis? And I think this is kind of what we landed on.
Gary, can I ask you, did I hear you say that each time we want to drop this in, we have to go through a permit application? Is that logistically, how would that work time-wise?
Technically, yeah, sorry, Heidi, you want to answer that?
I can answer that one. Hi, Heidi.
Hi, Heidi.
So in the event that there is flooding that is currently not anticipated, obviously, but in the event of flooding, the roadway would be flooded, which would constitute a public emergency, and it's a very simple emergency certification. It's simple as far as communication would be between highway superintendent stating there's an emergency situation and conservation agent issuing the emergency certification for obvious reasons.
And that's in real time.
It's all within our town.
In real time.
That's all within town, so we're not talking about any state agency or anything.
Right. So it's simply put, Superintendent Wilds will be out there on site doing his regular routes, monitoring all the different culverts in what areas. We watch that. It starts to get to the point. He's going to make the call to Heidi, and then that hopefully will then move it pretty much at that moment. Heidi, is it a formal document that you send, or is it an offer?
It is a formal document. There's criteria that this would very clearly and very simply meet the criteria to issue that formal document, and it can be issued on the spot.
Does it have to be flooded, or can it be, in Gary's judgment, a situation where it needs to be dropped in?
Imminent threat, imminent threat also is a public safety threat, imminent threat being declared and stated by, a public official such as, Gary, is absolutely warrants an emergency certification.
So if I could draw an analogy, kind of like when we close schools before the first flake of snow is dropped, we know it's coming, and therefore we can declare and act accordingly.
Correct.
Okay.
If it is flooded, Gary, can you get through with your equipment to drop those plates in?
Yes, we could. Now, I would caution you that I would not. That emergency basis, I think, could be decided upon prior because of the advanced nature of forecasting these days. Where if we were, let's just, for the sake of the conversation, it's a 100-year storm. They're predicting 14 inches of rain in 24 hours. That's something we're going to know is coming. And if we have our concerns or anxiety, we could, if this is what my understanding, and the engineers could tell me better, but the thought process with this and putting this in would put it back to an ability for us to meter it as it gets metered now before it leaves Woods Pond, and retain its retention capabilities, which is what its Woods Pond is now, as things rise.
So is this for the 100-year storms or those middle of the road storms?
Greg?
Depends on the flooding, right? I mean, we talked a little bit about this today. If it's going to be based on what we see the flow, if the data shows as Ipswich River watershed folks have done, hopefully we'll never need it. But if we start to see it rising and it's 24 hours, we see 16 inches of rain, or we start over a longer period of time, and that's starting to get close, we drop it in and it's flowing the exact same way. Well, almost exactly, pretty much the exact same way it's flowing today, from a water standpoint.
What options do we have at this point? What are potential directions that we might take with this culvert?
So there's two options
just discussed. What are the other options that we have?
It's one of two at this point in time. We either move forward with the existing design with the additional plate that we've added with the brackets on each side as a fail safe, or the project doesn't move forward. And the funding mechanism that exists right now through the state grant and other donors, the timeline would not allow us to do, say, a redesign or further analysis before sort of the clock would run out from the period of time that we have to build this culvert. So
we have a decision factor here, and that is that we approve what's been suggested this evening, or we, for the future, next 20 years, whatever, continue with what we have now. There's no other options.
I think the one thing I would say is that
is there any other options? I'm hearing there isn't, but just confirm it.
We would keep on for a period of time until that culvert fails, and then we'd have to build it the way they've been designed now based on state standards, which would mean we would be on the hook for $500,000 without having any outside funding potentially.
Yeah. So realistically,
we don't have any input that suggests it's going to fail in the next 20 years. I mean, we haven't had water go through the pipes and start to wash it out or anything like that. It could. Any of the culverts could. But there's nothing to say that this is ready to fail. It's not as if we have things collapsing in there or one of the 5 pipes collapsing. So I understand that. I just want to understand what our options are. The options are either we do it or we don't do it. There's no other options.
Wayne, you said there are 75 culverts, and this is top of the list that you want to attack and get done. So I presume that's because it's a priority for a reason, and that's because of anticipated failure. The flooding's gotten worse.
Yeah, just as I said, the dual purpose, the fact that Pond Street overtops currently, and when roads overtop, that's the worst scenario because it creates erosion,
Right.
and those culverts are old, and then the ecological impact, and the combination of those two things are the sweet spot for prioritization, and particularly outside funding.
Got it.
Kim, I think
So if we make
it's fair
this
to
change,
you to understand that this has been driven by the hope to return fish to Hood's Pond.
Alewife going
so
up,
that
I guess.
they can breed in Hood's Pond and go back out to the ocean and come back into Hood's Pond and make the whole system more ecologically healthy.
Yep.
That was the main driver for this, as I understand it.
And we found a way, or the team found a way to get $500,000 funded by grants.
In order to get the fish.
Make that happen.
That's right. So here's where we received this. Excuse me. The Board of Selectmen has been aware of this for a year, we'll say. I remember I was aware of it because they came to the fish people came to the Conservation Commission about 2 years ago and proposed this, and they've been working on it, and they've done a lot of good work trying to understand it and identifying that culvert area is one of the reasons that the fish can't apparently go up the pipes, whatever the case may be. I'm sure there are other things that they need to work on, including at the old Peabody, at Ipswich Road, where Howlett Brook goes through. There is the dam, and they have a way of this recently discussed at the CONSCOM, and so they're working out the various issues there. However, from the point of view of the board, the information that we've been dealing with is about 2 days old. And I kind of thought that we would be in good shape when I started to read it. It sounded good that big work had been done. There's a lot of paperwork there that indicates a lot of work has been done. However, as I continued to read in it, and it was kind of said today, Wayne, that we're kind of dealing with averages. We're not as concerned about peaks as we are averages. And that includes, I think it's figure 2 in the document, one of the documents that we have that shows a graph and shows a peak and then shows the other and whatever. I can assure you that we're not interested in averages. The Mississippi River, on average, is very, very tame and works very, very well. The problem is when it's not the average, it's at the peak. And again, that's what our concern should be, because that's when the flooding occurs and that's when the issues occur. From my reading of this, and you can correct me, perhaps you know about this, Neil, that the basin that we're talking about is 2 square miles. I think that's what I read in there. Again, this is all new to me in the last 48 hours trying to understand what's there. If that's the case, that's a huge acre feet of water. And there is a big issue here about being able to, and it was mentioned in the discussion today, just now, between having essentially Pond Street represent a dam with a 3-foot head above the existing pipes. That would be 3 feet at 2 square miles. That's a lot of acre feet of water. And so the concern is that we understand the effect of that. Now, trying to put in plates, especially when you're trying to estimate we're going to have a problem, but trying to put plates in when water's running fast is, at a minimum, very dangerous. I think we need to be extremely careful with this. This is not a passive system. This is an active system that requires people to be working at times when the weather isn't necessarily the best. Maybe it is because things haven't happened. But once that water starts up and you try to deal with that without having a well-designed, I think there may be another alternative here, which is designing the gates to be able to be in place, and you up and down the gates or something like that. I'm not suggesting we do that, but it seems to me that it would still not be a passive system, but at least it would be one that would be a little safer. Now, Gary mentioned that if we have a 100-year storm of 14 inches of rain, that we would know about it 24 hours beforehand. The problem is we have a history in 2006 of what was known as the Mother's Day storm. And no one predicted that there was going to be 14 inches of rain. It caught everyone by surprise because apparently it stalled. And I can remember the person responsible for public safety in our region was on the phone calling all of the various towns trying to figure out how bad things were in the town. So I hear what Gary's saying, that hopefully we know about it, but the most recent one of 14 inches, we did not know about 24 hours beforehand. So those are some of my comments. Great concern. Can I hear some feedback?
Yeah, I'll jump in if you don't mind. Thanks for that, Dick. And I think those are important points too, because that's everyone is worried about the big flood because a lot of times you don't know when it's coming. And when you do, it's, crazy trying to prepare for it. So I agree. And I was around for the Mother's Day flood back in 2006 as well and saw a lot of the damage that occurred all around the watershed. So definitely aware of that. And so I think one important point that we tried to make in the analysis is that during the 100-year flood, which we do have a pretty good handle on based on the modeling that was done. And so there's a tool that the USGS produces that does a pretty good job at predicting what the 100-year flow is going to be at that point. And that's based on regression analysis and the overall size of the watershed, the 2 square miles that you mentioned, what the watershed is made up of. And it also does take into account the storage of that watershed. So the model does take into account the fact that Hood Pond stores water, and given all those inputs, it outputs a number. And so knowing that, we have a pretty good handle on what that number is. And so based on all the surveying work and engineering work that was done, we know that the current situation during the 100-year flood is not good either. I mean, everything would flood. The 5 pipes would just experience a fire hose of water, because not only would they be at capacity, they would have a large head above them that would just force water out of them. And so one important point, that we'd like to remember too, for this new stream simulation design culvert that meets the standards, it would pass all those floods. So as well as the 100-year flood. And so I know there's a concern about that water moving down more water moving downstream quicker. But the reality is that in the new scenario, you have water that is more efficiently being able to move downstream. And so that's in opposition to what happens now, where you have high velocities coming out for an extended period of time while the pond is able to respond to that large storm event where water is already overtopping and causing damage to the road surface. But in the new scenario where you give the pipe enough room to efficiently carry that volume, there's going to be lower velocities. The roadway will not be overtopped, and we think that the situation would be largely improved based on the metrics that that the engineering work has gone into it and stuff like that. So
Neil, you essentially then backed off on any help that we would get from the damming effect of Pond Street as it is now to hold back water. That's when I started reading, and I saw that graph, and that position is a concern, because if you can hold back 1 square mile of water at 1 foot or 3 feet as a total, but let's just say 1 foot, that's a huge amount of water that you can hold back to not affect downstream immediately, but over a slower period of time. That's where the concern is. Kevin, it seems to me I expected that you would have come back when I asked for alternatives with something about additional engineering. Again, because this has been new to me, it seems to me that somewhere there I read that for $5,000 there was going to be some kind of a study or something. Maybe that's already been done, but apparently it has been done. You tell me it said that yes or no, but was there something in there? I'm sorry, I just can't catch up with all this stuff in a 48-hour period.
I'll just say this: the people on this call, both the Topsfield employees and Ipswich River Watershed, there's been incredible amount of efforts in the last 2 weeks to try to get at this small timeline, get as much information. Like I said at the last meeting, we want to get this right. Our names are on this. All of our names are going to be on this at the end of the day. And we need to make sure we're 100% confident in that we have measures. If it doesn't do what the watershed thinks it's going to do, what's the alternative? The alternative, and this is done in many communities, as I understand it, with boards to basically stack, to basically limit the water during the storm conditions. So this is a similar approach with a much more heavy duty version of that. The alternatives, Mr. Gant, there really isn't a design alternative as I understand it. And that's because of two reasons. One, the state regulates that 10-foot mouth as a standard culvert anytime you touch a culvert. So like back in the day when you would take one culvert out and put a new one in, as soon as you put your shovel in the ground, my understanding is that triggers the new requirements of how you build the culvert. So if we had a failure in the future, we could be subjected to, depending on the severity of that, of having to do this anyway. The second part of that is that because it's that 10-foot mouth is the standard, like we all agree, we all know normal times, it's going to flow the same as it flows today, just based on how water flows. But the state limits any type of modifications to a standard that they've created from the culvert standpoint. And so the only thing that, and we exhausted, we did site walks for multiple hours. We sat in rooms for multiple hours. We talked to multiple people who have knowledge of this. The only thing that's allowed in emergency situations only is to put the boards or to put the steel down. And that's where we landed and said, okay, that's the fail-safe. What's the difference between this project and any other culvert is that we're preemptively discussing this stopgap. Typically, the culverts are built, and then if there's an issue, they then go back and ask for emergency relief, and they put those boards in, as I understand it. We've taken the approach, as I think you've heard from everybody, to be very conservative and ask for as much data as possible, and then also alternative design, which has happened in the last 48 hours, which is the standard when it comes to mitigating concerns or having real issues with water flow, to incorporate that in the initial design as a change order rather than waiting for it to flood, having major issues, and then being responsive. We're trying to be proactive at the end of the day.
Kevin, could I ask either Gary or Greg to respond to Dick's concern about how difficult is it to put in those plates against that heavy stream of water? Is that a difficult thing to do? Garrett, you're on mute.
I'm not sure if Greg's still available. If he is, I'll just start off. Were the design as it is right now, and the channels that would be affixed to the upgradient of the box culvert, it would be put in. Now, again, maybe I misspoke earlier, Mr. Gant, when I referenced the 100-year, but whatever the case may be, and you are right that did suddenly sit over us with the amount of rain. It wasn't predicted. I guess my point being with that was that in this day and age, were we to have a forecast ahead of time, if we were worried about that, and this is what our plan was, this could go in ahead of any of the rise of the pond itself in an emergency basis. That I would go to Heidi and or Kevin or you all for that and say, look, I think we may or may not need to have this in. As it's designed, it would be put in to meter the bottom of the outflow, so it would replicate what would be currently leaving before the pond would rise, is how I understand it. So the logistic part of it, if the easy answer to that, yes, I could put it in any circumstance because of the channels there and drop it into place. Liken it to a guillotine is really how this will work.
So even if you couldn't predict, Gary, if the storm were upon us and you guys are going out in a wild storm, you could drop this in?
I can't guarantee you every single time. There's no obvious, I would say most times, yes. There's always that what if moment where we would have to scramble for something else if that were the case. But I can't give you a guarantee that would never happen. But
does this new design eliminate the flooding on 97, whether it's the largest storm or the middle storms? Because we've talked about preserving the fish and letting them get back into the pond to spawn and go both ways. Does it also address the infrastructure and erosion issue? Does this take away the flooding?
It doesn't take away the flooding on 97. What it would do is eliminate the flooding of Pond Street and the house immediately adjacent to the culvert. Really, this culvert replacement is kind of at the top of the watershed as far as what's in Topsfield, and to alleviate any flooding concerns, especially along Route 97, there would have to be a number of culverts redesigned heading downstream to accept higher flows from Hood Pond. Plus, also some of these projects are also scheduled to occur in Boxford on further upstream on Pie Brook. So really, it's this type of project would have to happen at multiple locations downstream until the water crosses over a dam or reaches the river.
So it alleviates the flooding on Pond Street, not 97?
Correct.
I am fully happy to admit that I am not a expert at really any of the things that we're discussing here. But on my screen, I see about 5 or 6 people who are experts or reasonably close to in their different areas. And the fact that they have all come together and put this plan into place and gotten it funded. I mean, are we ever going to be sure about everything? Never. Not in anything that we ever vote on at any point on this board will we ever be sure of everything. It's just an impossibility on this board, in life, whatever. But I feel thoroughly confident that this has been vetted to the best ability that we can do. We have an opportunity to act on it tonight, and I'd like to see us move in a positive way.
Kevin, could I ask, does this in any way, if we move ahead with this project, does it in any way put us in a worse situation than the current culvert?
Well, that's what we're trying to not create. I mean, that's what's on the shoulders, right? Like that's what we need.
That's the unknown. That potentially this could be a worse situation than the current culvert.
Yes. And the only point we've been struggling with this to try to get to a place of trying to feel comfortable because we didn't have all the data we needed. And even if we did, I mean, hypothetically speaking, if the data came back, if they were able to run the report we asked them to, and it showed what we think it's going to show or potentially could show, and having more flooding or more water coming through at certain times, we'd probably be having this discussion right now, considering how much funding we've that's there. And that it is the standard on the design. We wouldn't be able to table it, go back and redesign it, as I understand it. This is the standard. So
at any point in time in the future, if we wanted to repair this culvert, it has to be this design.
Wayne, is that accurate?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And I should point out that the design standards, in addition to size, are equally, if not more, concerned with everything we're talking about here. It is illegal to do downstream damage. We've already passed that test in 3 different levels. We cannot design anything that is going to increase flow or damage downstream. That's part of the standards as well. I just want to, get that out there as well.
Are there people on Pond Street considered downstream?
No.
To the west.
They're upstream of the culvert. The people on Pond Street, there are people on the other side of Pond Street, but they're not getting a flow through on their side. But the people on the pond side will be upstream.
So Kevin, you, Heidi, Gary, and Greg, what level of confidence do you have behind this design and moving forward with this?
I'll speak at a high level, and then I'll let the experts speak. Preferably Greg, if you have a thought on that. I've asked the same questions you all probably have, and the questions you've asked tonight probably 10 times to everybody sitting on this call during the last couple of weeks to just understand it as best we possibly could. And until we came up with the solution with this fail-safe, our team wasn't there. But that component of it has proven to work in other locations. It's a standard method to limit water flow. It's able to be designed in, being able to put it in there. I talked to Gary, I looked at Gary in the eyes today. I said, can we do this operationally? Gary said, yes. Looked at Heidi, would we be able to do this when we need to do this? She said, absolutely. I looked at Greg and I said, water flow purposes, are you comfortable with it in a storm? What's going through? And Greg said, yes. Those are the 3 yeses I need to bring this to you tonight. I wouldn't be here tonight if they didn't sit this morning and say, we're ready to go with this. That said, there's always that, you can never be 100% in anything in life, like Mr. Hook said. There's always the possibility that something crazy happens during a storm and, vehicles break down, people get hurt, they can't go out there. I don't know, but this is really the solution if the project moves forward. And if we're going to do anything at this point, at this culvert, whether it's now or 20 years down the road, I think this is ultimately what we're going to be doing anyway. That's my feel of it. Greg or Gary or anyone else have a thought on that?
Yes, I think. Go ahead, Gary. I think it's a good compromise. I'm not sure we would have landed in a better place if we had started from scratch. I think we probably end up in the same place we are now. And I understand Ipswich River Watershed and their consultants have done a lot of work and have done a lot of analyses. And I think in, the vast majority, maybe in 95, 99% of situations where a culvert is replaced, what they've done is more than sufficient. I just think in this particular case, in the proximity of the pond, it's the wrong type of analysis that needed to be done. And I think the plate addresses, just in case the numbers don't turn out to be the way they calculated them, that there's a way to prevent the flooding and downstream effects that we certainly don't want to see.
And one last question is there would we have been replacing this culvert other than the fish from an infrastructure perspective? Was this on our list? I know, Gary, we had talked about looking at culverts. Would this one be in need of repair in a couple of years? You're on mute.
Sorry. It's a great question. In light of what's recent events in Topsfield and with Mile Brook and others, it's obvious we need to have a comprehensive study of all our culverts in town going forward. To answer your question, I don't know. I couldn't give you a time frame of when. At some point it was going to happen. This is an older system, but it has worked. It is a barrier, and I appreciate that fact of part of this process and why that needs to be replaced. I don't know where it would fall in my top 10, to be quite honest with you, if we had more emergency needs for culverts.
Could I offer this thought on culverts? Not that, but you have to think about, when you think about the importance of a culvert, what is it providing as passage over it? The culvert at 97 is a critical culvert, or the culvert at for the same brook, in this case Howlett Brook, that's downstream of this, at Ipswich, on Ipswich Road, would be critical, because if you break that one, it's very hard to get to Ipswich. If you break the 97 one at, well, we know where 97 one is, down from Piper Park, then no traffic comes down 97. If this particular one on Pond Street went, people could still get to their houses, so to speak, for the next 6 months by simply going up and back down the fork for, let's say, an extra half mile. Not that we want to not deal with things that need to be dealt with. But by the way, this particular culvert is not what most would consider a critical culvert, except that if it washed out, then we'd have all the problems we're just talking about, because it would be a straight stream. But here and there, I think we need to be extremely careful, because some decisions that we make if there's a mistake, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference. Yeah, we have to buy a different this and buy a that. This is an infrastructure one, though, that makes a bigger difference downstream to many people, not just those on Hood's Pond. And that's where we need to be careful. It seems to me that this one is worthy of more study. Could I ask a
but Dick, if I may,
those pipes,
Dick,
and this is just a better way to do it for the fish to go, or they just cannot swim the 35 feet up a pipe like that?
Just real quickly, I think we're getting sidetracked a little bit about the fish and the initiative and the origin of this project. I mean, the fish are one benefit, but that is not the driver. It's the combination of risk of analysis, flooding, and overall health. And so, I just want to be, and again, the risk that's there currently to flooding and catastrophic failure will be higher now than when this new structure goes in. It's going to minimize current risk downstream. If anything, it's really a plus to the current situation overall. And again, this is a partnership project. It's not a watershed project. We went into this in partnership, and so I just want to emphasize it's a partnership and intended to be a win-win all around.
What is it? What are you looking for, Dick, in terms of more study? Because if we don't do it tonight, the first thing you're going to have to study, I think, is where you're going to come up with $500,000 to do it. But what is the question is there a single question or concern or a area of concern? Because you've gone over a lot of stuff, but to be honest, I've kind of lost what specifically you're concerned about.
I'm concerned.
Marshall,
I think I can summarize it very quickly. I'm concerned because I understand that there's something like 2 square miles of basin that we have now essentially a head of about 3 feet that makes Pond Street a dam that prevents, in the case of a high event, a high rain event, a high water event, to prevent that water from going down immediately downstream, but rather lets it pan out over a period of time. And yes, it does affect the people on Pond Street, and they know that. And it doesn't happen very often. When it does, it's a mess. And I know the Kings used to live on that particular property we're talking about. And yes, it was a problem that one time when it flooded them out, it was a long time ago, it was tough. But that's where the concern is. We essentially have what represents a dam with a straw that lets some water out, and we're going to greatly change that straw and take away the dam because this particular culvert is going to be able to pass much more water. Okay, that's fine, but it's going to pass much more water downstream faster. And there is the graph, right? I think it's figure 2, but you guys know, you wrote the graph. It shows that the peak. I start reading this stuff and I say, now I understand there's a problem. I felt better before I started reading it. I had more confidence that everybody knew what they were doing. But after I started reading it and saw your graphs and that, it creates a problem. It creates concerns. But again, you asked the question, Marshall. The main thought is that we have something that represents a dam of about 3 feet head to take up water when we have a major event. And as it's been said, and I know that just recently it was Linebrook Road, Rowley Road in our case, in Topsfield, Linebrook Road, but it's actually Linebrook Road. The water was topping over as it was coming out of upstream from that. Was topping over and then going over into Hood's Pond.
And my understanding, and someone could correct me if I'm wrong. So yes, this culvert, your straw, as you say, or set of straws, is not in imminent danger of failing right now, but it's not going to last forever. And at any point in the future, if we're going to change it, it's going to be changed to exactly the design we're talking about now. So your straws aren't going to last forever, except if at some point in the next 5-10 years, we need to fix it because it's become an imminent problem, we're very likely going to be on the hook for this significant cost, which we can avoid right now.
I think everybody has.
I'm not sure that this will be
I think
the
you
same
put
design
forward
10 years
what
from
your
now.
issue is.
Lynn, I wanna go.
appreciate your concerns, but I think we've heard them, we understand them. Boyd, do you have anything new to add?
Yes, I do. We've been listening here for 30 minutes from 2 or 3 people that don't have a clue what they're talking about. I have one simple question. If we don't get started on this very quickly, we're going to lose the time to get the grant funding, I think. Is that not true, Kevin? We got a very good possibility of losing the grant money if we don't get started now. And I can tell you, I have a difficult time going to the people of the town of Topsfield to say, we're going to spend $500,000 to build a nice little culvert under that street to make your life a little bit easier. That's a big amount of money, and I got a problem asking the people of the town of Topsfield to do that. Our experts are sitting here. They've told us what their opinions are, and as far as I'm concerned, I'm ready to move on with the vote.
Madam Chair.
Yes, I was just going to say, Kevin, traditionally we don't vote during a working session. We do it for Monday. Do you need a vote tonight? Is there a sense of urgency, or can we vote on Monday? Because I think all of us have the information we need to make that vote.
So, Madam Chair, we have the contract with the vendor. We have a expiration date. We have a vendor on for the cost. We now know what the cost is. That expired tomorrow. However, with the conversations we had, we were able to get an extension to October 1. So we do have the ability to take this up on Monday and further analysis over the weekend for the questions that might be available, and then take a vote at that time once people had a little bit more time to reflect if need be. So that is certainly an option if it's the board's prerogative.
Sense of the board, do you need any additional time or any additional information to make your decision?
I do not.
No.
I do not.
All right. I would ask for a motion. I know it is a work session, but I do sense the urgency here. If we do not complete the construction by June 30th, then we're on the hook to pay some of that money, which we do not want. So could I have a motion, please?
I'd read it. I don't have it.
Yeah, we didn't write one out here.
We didn't write one, so it's more just motion to approve the Pond Street Culvert project to move forward as presented.
Yes, so moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. I just asked if there was any other discussion, so I think we're good. We'll move to roll call. Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Brown?
Aye.
Mr. Gant?
No, because I don't believe we have the information to be confident that this is safe.
Thank you. Mr. Hook?
Aye.
Minutes show that, please.
I
Chair.
guess Debbie will, this is being recorded, so Debbie can do the minutes and include that statement.
Those words in the minutes are always.
Sure. And Ms. Bermudez is an aye because I do not know all of the engineering that went into this, but I have faith in Mr. Crom and Mr. Wilds and Ms. Gaffney and the people that we're working with the Ipswich watershed. So I vote yes. So that motion passes 4-1. Thank you so much to everybody. I know this was a tremendous amount of energy and effort, and we look forward to seeing the new culvert.
And the fish back up at the Hood's Pond. I mean, if we can get that run going, that will be a very healthy thing for Hood's Pond. So I'm certainly in favor of that.
Great. Kevin, did you have something?
Just for what, there's still some technical things from Monday's meeting, just so everyone, so you know when you see the agenda for Monday, this will be on the agenda for Monday for the actual contract with the vendor, as well as the accepting of a donation from the Ipswich River Watershed Association to cover the additional costs beyond just the grant that we've already accepted.
That additional 70,000? Roughly?
It's so over 100, right, Wayne? I think it's 120 roughly, ballpark 110.
Oh, okay. So it covers more because the contract's like 437 and the original grant was 369 or something like that.
Yeah, no, Madam Chair, you're spot on. There's a contingency that was initially not part of the project, which we said we need a contingency, which there's now a 5% contingency that's been added into the project that has been fundraised by the Ipswich River Watershed Association. And then there's project management costs in addition to that, which is outside that contract that will be in front of you, roughly $23,000, I want to say. That brings that cost to a greater amount. All those costs will be absorbed. And I would say that the cost to the modifications that we're talking about tonight on the culvert to provide those safety valves in a sense, or stop gaps, are things that we would look to those contingencies to cover those costs as well.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Wayne and Neil, for joining us tonight and for all your hard work on this and your input.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank you,
well.
Wayne, Neil.
Thank you all.
Good to see you guys.
Thank you.
All right, our next item is the Comcast contract. And I see we have, well, obviously we have two members of the cable committee with us tonight, Marshall Hook and Bill Whiting. Kevin, I will turn it over to you, maybe for this introduction of where we are. And I believe Mr. Whiting is going to be speaking.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair and Select Board. And thank you, Mr. Whiting, for joining us today. First, I just want to say thank you to Mr. Whiting for all his efforts, not just over the course of the past year and a half around this contract that we're going to discuss, but prior contracts that have been worked on. There's an incredible amount of institutional knowledge and just a vigor to help in the process of getting these contracts done. And we would not be where we are here today if not for the whole of the advisory committee, but especially Mr. Whiting's leadership. So, Bill, thank you.
And I'm just going to interrupt and say that any thanks you give to me, I did about this much compared to like this much that Bill did. So
every little bit helps, Marshall. Thank you.
There you go.
So with that being said, we've gone through a significant process to get where we are today. The executive summary is that basically we got everything we asked for, which is really great. And there's a lot of nuance to how we got there. And we're certainly farther along later than we want to be where we are. We wish we could have done a month or two ago, but we are where we are. And we're hoping to share with you tonight what the terms of the final deal are, as well as the final draft that was sent over today for board docs, which incorporates all the terms that Mr. Whiting will explain in a minute, so that if possible, if we can take it up on Monday and feel comfortable with it by Monday and take a vote, the contract will commence as of September 1, and we'll move forward from there. If it does go beyond that, and it's okay if it does, because we got to get it right, it's a 10-year contract. We would probably look at that commencement date and seeing what that looks like. But a lot of work. I won't get into the details of how many emails we've been exchanging and phone conversations in the last week and a half, but we've got to a good place, and I'm excited to turn it over to Mr. Whiting to give some of the more deets, the quick summary of the points that we looked at and where we ended up getting.
Okay, can I share my screen at this point?
I believe so.
You can, Bill.
Okay, let's see if we can.
Yeah, Bill, you should be all set.
Okay, let's see what happens. Oh, well, that's interesting. Well, we have a backup plan. What I wanted to review very quickly was what we talked about at the public hearing back in March, which explained to the subscribers, Comcast and Verizon, what we anticipated in achieving during the negotiation. So these are the 10 negotiation goals that we published at that point. The first one is to significantly increase Topsfield specific PEG programming. We'll be receiving over $100,000 a year to do that. The only question, frankly, is the will to do that. So we've got the money. We have to have the implementation issues. The second was to reestablish the Volunteer Cable Advisory Committee. The advisory committee that was established will self-destruct at the end of the year. We need to bring together some new volunteers to make that happen. We need to implement all the measures in the contract. That's something that is really has to be done at a certain point. Item 3 is to purchase portable video, audio, and computer equipment. We have the money to do that. We'll add 4 remote cameras in the town hall, public hall. Those cameras have been purchased. COVID sort of interrupted the installation of them by Brad Sweet, but that's done. We're going to add a second high definition PEG channel from both Comcast and Verizon. One of the things we haven't really, frankly, done much of work on is enhance the town website to make PEG channels easier to use. We did extensive survey work. We found out that there's a lot of issues, the way people don't understand what's there, how to use it. So there are things we need to do with the website to make that a more effective process. We wanted to invest in social media tools. That's something that Boxford does, but the real question is whether that fits with the town policy. So right now, we've taken no action on trying to use social media to get people aware and using cable. Add the capacity for live broadcasts in Proctor School. We'll have that. One thing we didn't quite understand, we wanted to have the same electronic program guides that tells you what's on the Comcast and Verizon channels as you get on all the other channels. It turns out that that's technically not feasible by either Comcast or Verizon. If we knew that, we would have taken it off the list. And we have a senior citizen discount. So I have tried to put all of the basic information that you need to know on a single page. And that should be in your board docs.
It is in board docs. It's the first item in the documents.
Okay, so let me take you very quickly, and hopefully this will have the information that you may need. I like to call it an executive summary because that's who I'm talking to. It's a 10-year license. We will also be negotiating by the end of the year a contract with Verizon. That will be a 5-year license. And we're very hopeful that the 2 contracts will be similar in the provisions that they make. The 2 types of revenue we get, one is called PEG, annual revenue, and that is determined by the state as a percent of the gross average revenues from Comcast. We'll be getting 2.5%. That's our negotiation. We're coming from a 1.5 in the prior contract. 1.5 was probably the lowest in the state. 2.5 is pretty much right there also. But we did talk about in the public hearing the fact that we were trying to keep costs down. We really had to focus on the impact on the end users. So if you want to learn more about the license, here's the license reference. And I've tried to give you a license reference so you can go right to the section. But we're talking about $38,000 estimated on an annual income for 10 years. When we talk about capital, in the prior contract, we had $9,000 a year. We've increased that to $18,000. If you put the 2 together, it's something over $50,000. If we get the same thing from Verizon, we'll have well over $100,000. We can use PEG and capital for whatever we want, but that means that we've got a number of existing expenses, primarily with Boxford Cable, but that gives us money to purchase equipment, to take care of old equipment as it determines that it's no longer necessary. So I think we're in good shape from a financial point of view. We have an additional standard video channel that will go in no later than July of next year. This requires that we have Verizon doing the same thing. If you want more details, here's the reference. With the option within 24 months to upgrade that to a high definition channel. Now you need to understand there's costs associated with these. We need to buy equipment and we need to put administrative functions in place to make those happen. But we have the ability in the contract to do that. We, in the past license, had free public drops, meaning we have public cable access in all our town buildings. Comcast wanted to take that out of the contract. We put it back in. And there's one agreement that many people felt we wouldn't be able to get. Comcast was not willing to write that into the contract, but we have a side letter, and that is a senior discount. But don't get too excited. This is not a very significant discount, and it's quite selective. So it's $2 off, not the basic service cost, but I think their second level of service option. And in order to get that $2, you must be 65, head of the household, and receiving SSI or Medicaid. And I have no idea how many people in Topsfield are in that financial situation and whether they're looking for something other than basic. So that was a bit of a struggle. You won't see that in many other towns, but we committed to do that. And there's a side letter that should be in board docs that gives you details on that. We did talk about the fact that we were really conscious of how we were impacting subscribers. And you know that subscribers do get a line on their bill that we actually control because it's driven by the funds that we receive. The average customer bill is about $120 a month, and I've given you where that's based on. The latest statistics we have is 2020, so we know how much was billed by Comcast. We know how many subscribers we have. That's the average bill. There are two components of that monthly charge. One is for PEG numbers, and that's specifically 2.5% of the bill's revenue. That's about $3 on an average customer. But we finally got people to accept the fact that that is usage sensitive, meaning that a customer who uses more cable services will pay more for the PEG franchise fee than someone who uses less. So it's basically usage sensitive. And our best guess of the current contract as it's set, that would be about $3 for the average customer. Remember, that varies dramatically. And the existing, where we're coming from, is approximately $180 for the average. The capital franchise is a function of the $18,000 that we pay. That's the same for everybody. That will be about 80 cents for the new contract, and that's moving from 73 cents from the old. This is a complicated process. It's not an easy way to determine it. And safe to say that most towns, frankly, don't know what those numbers are. Those are a result of a lot of involvement and initiation. So that's my one page of information. I guess between Kevin and I, we can try to answer any questions that are out there, unless you have a different way of doing it.
No, Mr. White.
Oh, I had one question, if I could. If we upgrade to the high definition channel, Bill, you mentioned it'll take additional equipment and admin to do that upgrade. Do we have the money coming from this contract in order to do that?
Well, let me be frank with you, because that's who I am. We have an amount of money. We know somewhere around $100,000. We have not done a really careful study of what a budget would be. So we know there are many components that we're going to have to pay out of that $100,000. Somewhere around 45 to Boxford. We have some recurring charges. We have a number of items of equipment that we need to purchase if we're in fact going to do our own video work over and above what Brad does, we need to purchase equipment. We need to train people. We need to have an administrator to work on all that stuff. So we have the money, and right now we are going to assume that the critical elements we can handle. The real question is, how much does the town want to really put into creating new video programming?
I'm just going to follow up on that real quick. So we built it in so we have 24 months to start the HD channel. So we have the ability to do it. They'll do it if we we're going to, now that we got in the contract, spend that time and that due diligence to find out exactly what the equipment is, the cost will be. And either way, if we have it there, if we can do it, right? If we can't do it because the money's not there, then we're not able to. It's a 10-year contract. We have 2 years to do it. I'm hopeful we can, because I think we need to. I think it's important for people can see it in high def, see all of us on high def. But I think that we're with the revenues that we should generate off of this. And I do want to make a point about the revenue side in a little more detail. But with the revenues, we can build we hope we can build up front a little bit now that we're having some increases in certain places, the capital specifically. That could hopefully get us there for a funding component of this.
Is it really two issues, Kevin? One is whether or not we do additional programming, and the other is just whatever we're doing right now, can we do it in high def and show it in high def?
That's right. It's how much do we want to take it to the next level? There is infrastructure, hardware we'll have to purchase for the HD components of it. There will be a cost, but if, to Mr. Whiting's point at the top, where he said one of our goals was to expand the types of programs we're putting out there, if we go in that direction, utilizing the HD, that's where that would kind of those costs would come into play. But there's certain fixed costs, base costs that we'll have to do HD. And then Mr. Whiting's point, if we wanted to grow it, there would be some additional beyond that as well. But the HD is a new world. That's not something that Boxer Cable's, they're familiar enough with it. It would be something that they're going to be, I think, learning a little bit as they go as well. If I could, on the financial part of it, it's worth noting this because it was really kind of clever. You can notice on the capital, we doubled our capital from $9,000 payments, 10 payments annually, to $18,000 in 10 payments, so $180,000 in over that. So what does that mean? So the increase to double that went up 7 cents, we're estimating. Whereas on the GAR, where we went up from 1.5% to 2.5%, that has a more linear correlation to it. That's basically directed to the to that. So the capital kind of grows at a slower rate in essence if you increase it. And so when we went out with a lower percentage purposely because we didn't want the sticker shock for customers and have this giant increase, and try to convince that it would be good for everybody if we would focus on the capital. We asked for the 180,000 and we ended up getting the 180,000. And it was it's different than a lot of other communities when they focus on the GAR, but we're different because our percentage is already so low that we didn't want to all of a sudden go from 1.5% to 5% and everybody's saying, oh my gosh, the government fees on my bill, call town hall and having to deal with those. We're very conscious of the sticker shock and making sure we keep those costs for our users down, while still building the monies that we need to in order to provide the services when it comes to PEG.
Just one point, and I'm not sure which are the right dates, but the dates on this summary say that this contract is effective 10/1/21 to 9/30/31.
That was my assumption, because I thought we've talked to the lawyer, the convention, we've already, the license has expired. It expired at the end of June. So my understanding was that normally the effective date would be the first of the month after it's been approved. Now, Kevin, you may know that that's September rather than October. That was my understanding.
Okay, so is the contract, which has different dates, the correct dates?
My understanding is the contract, I believe, may still have the September date.
It does.
I was given to understand that that would be October 1, but that's something we need to nail down with our lawyer.
What I was told last is if we get the contract done within the month, they can date it and get that payment out. So if we do it on Monday's meeting, if we're comfortable and we were able to move that contract and ratify it, the September 1 date should be good. If we go to October, it's going to be incredibly hard to have them go back because they close out that month and move forward. So that's the standard, as I've heard most recently. But Bill and I we can quadruple check that and make sure we're in place.
Okay. Any questions from the board on the contract?
I just have a comment. I think you guys did a great job. It's not easy dealing with Comcast or Verizon. And I can tell you it's not easy because I'm in process of trying to learn how I can cut my cable. And they're not easy to deal with. And I appreciate all the work that you guys have done. And I think you put together about as good a package as you could put together.
You know, the very first time I met Bill Whiting was when Boyd grabbed me and dragged me across the auditorium there at Town Hall, and he sat there and told me and Bill, he said, "I want you guys to get us more money." There you go, Boyd.
And it looks like you did.
Well,
What
Bill
Boyd
did.
wants, Boyd gets.
Madam Chair, if I could make one
Yes.
final point on the senior discount, that came in on Tuesday, and that came in on that side letter. They kind of just did the side letter. We were pushing for it. That's what we got very late in negotiation. I have gone back to Bill Hewig, our attorney, and have said, what are the comps for these discounts where they exist? Is $2 really what most communities are getting? And also, the letter, as I read it, an email exchange said it was basic, but as I read that letter, it didn't, unless I missed something. I have a question out to Bill Hewig on the side letter. I would make the argument that that's not limited just to the basic, because it doesn't reference the basic package in there as far as I could tell. It doesn't necessarily say it's more of the Social Security, Medicare, those different categories that Mr. Whiting mentioned earlier. So I'm trying to get clarity. I literally had email exchanges at 5 or 6 o'clock this afternoon trying to get clarity on that ahead of here. I don't have that. So, but I'm trying right now. My goal is, if we can do anything on this agreement, because it is a side letter as well, is to have that go up the $2 to increase if we can, and also expand it to any and all users who qualify financially for it.
We do believe that they basically constructed a senior discount that nobody qualifies for. So
That was pretty restrictive.
we're not quite as dumb as maybe they think we are. We're going to try to do a little better by that.
All right. Well, yes, I would concur with Boyd. Thank you so much, Bill and Marshall, and Kevin, for the work that you've done on this. I know it was a long haul, and you got what we set out to do.
Yes. Raphael McDonald is the third
And
member.
Raphael, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Raphael. So we will take a vote on this on Monday night.
Thank you, guys.
If there's any comments on the contract as you're reading it, if there's any comments or questions, if you could let me know early Monday morning, that would be really helpful, just so I can get that worked through to try to update the version on the for the vote Monday if need be.
For sure. Thank you. So, Bill, you're freed up now. You're available for another committee?
No. I think 20 years has been enough.
Dick,
We have one more, Verizon.
Dick says now you got to do Verizon. Yeah.
I can do that. Frankly, my big concern is implementation. And you need somebody after the first of the year, volunteer type, to manage the process and to implement what we've had in the contract. And that's not an easy thing.
It's not, but I trust Kevin to be able to oversee that.
I think that's unrealistic. Kevin has more than enough to do today.
I think he'll find a way to manage it. He always does.
Mr. Whiting, I'm not letting you go too far apart. We still got Verizon.
I can deal with Verizon. I can't deal with after the first of the year.
Thank you so much. All right, we'll move on as it's now 9:15. We'll move on to the Tri-Town Shared Services Grant. Kevin, I didn't see anyone from the Board of Health. Are you discussing this?
So the hope for today's meeting was to have feedback from the other town administrators on a very, very rough draft that I reviewed and had edits on, but I hadn't put into the document. And the Tuesday was the date we'd agreed to with Middleton and Boxford. Unfortunately, I don't have edits at this time to share, so I didn't have anything to put together to present. Ultimately, though, the hope is to get those edits from the other communities on it's 3 documents, an MOA and 2 job descriptions. The 2 jobs are purposely contracted positions, just like our pandemic nurse would be. So that we have sort of that buffer when it comes to how we work with that person or persons. But there is some conflicts in the original draft of the MOU that was provided and the job descriptions, and it just needs to be done better. So we're working on that, and we'll come back to you folks at a future date with further information.
Okay, it looked like there was a document that was put up there originally, Kevin, and probably then it was pulled down because it needed those edits. But if anyone saw that document, and I made some comments, they're probably in your edited version. But I'll touch base with you on anything that I found. So if anyone found anything in the document while it was up there, please feel free to share that with Kevin for the next version. Okay, moving on. Attachment A on the budget. So this was a recommendation from Dave Larson, who has joined us tonight. Hi, Dave. And it looks like Catherine has put together some examples of how this might look. So Kevin, and I see Catherine is with us. Welcome, Catherine.
Can I interrupt here just for a second?
Sure.
I had a tough, tiring day, and I'm still recovering. So I had said earlier before the meeting started that I was going to get to a point where I'm going to bail out. I've read the documents that are upcoming before us now, and don't really have much comment to make on them. So I'm going to bail out and let you guys do the dirty work while I call it a day.
Okay, Boyd. And then when you have a moment, if you can just let us know what your thought was, which version you liked. There are 2 different versions for attachment A. Catherine did 2 different examples. So if you can just share back to Kevin which one you preferred, that would be great.
Talk to him tomorrow.
Okay, terrific. Have a good night.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Good night.
Hold on, Vic. Boyd. Sorry. Good night.
So Kevin, I don't know if you or Catherine kind of want to walk through this, but Dave's suggestion was to add a percent column to be able to show the percent increase for the various line items on attachment A in the warrant. So it looks like Catherine did 2 versions. One is just a percentage on the total for each department, and the other one was a percentage on every line item.
Yeah, Madam Chair, maybe I'll just start at first. Catherine Gabriel, our town accountant, did a phenomenal job trying to give us some sense of what this could look like. Catherine and I have had discussions about this. I think it was something that Mr. Larson actually flagged for me within my first month on the job, because I came in right in the middle of the budget season. And wasn't something we tackled at that time. And then last year, it was brought up again. And so we had talked about, I think Mr. Gant, you had mentioned putting this on a future work session as we head into the budget season and the warrant season. It made sense to try to maybe start the conversation now, maybe end the conversation if we get to a good place with it. But ultimately with this, this belongs at the back of the warrant, which is your warrant, folks. It's the select boards, and we will do whatever the select board's preferences. We thought we'd give you a couple different options. First is the existing attachment A. The second is a version that has just the department changes, and then the third is all of the lines having a percentage. One of the things, and this is just a personal preference, or maybe not preference, but I should say just a thought on this and why we did it this way. The first version without the percentages, we all know that. The second one, where it's just the department level, was purposeful because we have different things that we move every year within sort of the other category. So same with salaries and wages potentially. And so, if we have information where things are shifting significantly in a small line item, it could have a significant percentage change on it. And for somebody who's reading through that and looking at just the percentages, they might see that and it might sort of might put more attention on something that we'll stand behind all day long, but might not be significant as it appears as a percentage or a lower percentage for that matter. And so just the second option, like I said, gets us with some percentages, but does it at a little bit of a higher level to smooth that out a little bit. Because really it's at the department level at the end of the day where the budgets kind of come in. The third version is the percentages for each category. It's pretty self-explanatory. It's every salary and wages, every other category, and then a total as well. As you've seen it, I'm sure, and as we see it right now, there's, town accountant, for example, the other expenses went up 15.61%. In this example, sorry, Catherine, didn't mean to call you out. It was the first one I saw. But it's the actual increase, it's a few $1,000s, but there's not really a good way to explain that in this document. So, people might have questions, and if there's an opportunity to share this type of information and answer those questions in real time, or have a path for people to answer those questions directly, so we can explain why it went up 15, because there's a lot of questions there that people don't have the answers on this document. I'd feel better about that, just because I don't want people to be confused by it. But at the same time, it's good to get more information, be as transparent as possible. So that's sort of the perspective. Catherine, I don't know if you have any thoughts on any of this as well.
Hi. I don't really have anything much to add on it. It really is a decision of whoever owns the budget, Board of Selectmen, the Select Board, excuse me. So either way is fine. I do think it could be perceived as being a little bit misleading in terms of the percentages in comparison to the whole budget, but I'd rather see people have a copy of the omnibus.
Catherine, I'm sorry. Can you just clarify what you just said? So you think it would be misleading if we went with which direction?
Well, just because we're often moving things around, we're trying to become more in line with what's going on with, what the auditors want us to have, and that changes all the time. For instance, I'm thinking about the time when we moved the parks and cemetery into the 4 category. People went, had a lot of questions about the numbers, how much they increased, when they really didn't. They just moved, and we were constantly explaining, changes like that. The budget pivots a lot, and unless you're looking at the budget and paying attention that way, it's not easy to, when you look at those percentages, some of them are going to stand out. And like the one that Kevin brought up in terms of just looking at the accountants, it's also, I think people go right to the percentages and they don't really look at the size of the budget. So 15% was an increase of the annual increase in the audit by a couple $1,000s.
Yep. Understood. Thank you.
If I could, Dave, you were the one who had requested this. Any input from you on each of the versions?
I was just going to comment. Originally, this came from looking at what Boxer's been doing for years. And the one thing that I recommended a year ago was not only the percent change, but the absolute dollar change. 2 columns, because you're absolutely correct. Percentages can be misleading, as we all know. But if you have the absolute dollar change as well, you can put both of them in perspective. And I think this is what was asked at the annual town meeting this year. Tony Hadfield made a comment requesting this to make it easier, because she said she had to calculate it herself. So if you have both percent and the absolute dollar amount, you can put it in perspective. If the budget went from $50 to $100, it's a 100% increase. And that would be a little confusing until you say, oh, it's only $50.
So, Dave, it sounds like you would like to have the percentage on every line item along with the absolute dollar value.
Yes. And I think there's another advantage here is people can review it. And when we get to the moderators forum, they'd be in a position maybe to ask some questions or get it clarified before the annual town meeting. So I think it'll help communicate to the people.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate your input, thanks. Dave. Any input or questions from the board or preferences?
I don't know how I feel about it, because while on the one hand I'm 100% for transparency. I mean, this is everyone's budget; they can see every number that they want. I don't know that this number provides really a lot more transparency, really, because you can't see the whole picture. I mean, I'm struggling to even kind of identify why it concerns me. My knee jerk was originally, hey, that's great. You know, more information is always good. But information without context and isn't necessary. I mean, it's fine. People should know about it, but without context, it's almost as though, and it's not a question whether or not people should know about it, because again, of course they should, but without context, then is it just going to beget more questions?
Marshall,
it's just going to create another column of, well, why did it go up? And then everything we're going to do is eventually going to say, well, look at this budget, look at the whole thing, and then all the information you need is in there.
So Marshall, then you're advocating for the middle one in the docs, A, without the high level of detail and not the comparison line by line.
Yeah, I guess, yes. But
another recommendation that I had made to, when talking to Kevin about this is, for those people that do want to take a deep dive into the budget, is maybe changing, like right now the omnibus budget is held in the accountant's page on the website. And I was suggesting putting on the homepage during budget season, budget 2023, and have the omnibus in there, which I think, that might be a little bit clearer. The other thing I was afraid that would happen is it would take away from the letter that the FinCom puts out. I mean, they take time to really figure out those percentages, and they explain the percentages that stand out. That I think that it's going to require more explanation on their part in that letter. And it's already like a multi-page letter already here.
The only thing I would add is that the dollar values are already on there, so anybody can see the percentage increase and the absolute dollar value. So if they're going to have questions, they can run it themselves. We're not sharing anything new here. We're just taking the math out of their hands.
Yeah.
I mean, I will say this, that I am completely open. I mean, there's nothing that says we try this year, and if we find out that A, it didn't solve whatever problem we're trying to solve, or B, it created new ones, then we can revisit it in a year. I guess if I'm to fall somewhere, then I would say, percentage on the total. We don't need the percentage on the line item, and let's give it a go for a year.
And one other thought, just for what it's worth too. I mean, we don't need to make a decision today. There's no deadline on this either. I mean, this is kind of an introduction about it. And as we go through the process, maybe get feedback from others. We can maybe at a certain point later, once the budget's actually finalized, is when this document starts to be come together, which is much later, months from now. We could obviously bring it up, but just another thought for what it's worth.
My initial reaction was
Dave's comment. Oh, sorry, Cam. Just any feedback on Dave's comment about the absolute dollar value going on there as well.
Well, that's just one more column. And this is kind of what I'm saying. With every additional piece of information, I just feel like eventually you're always going to go back to the omnibus budget. That's where all your information is. And so if this is a one sheet on that, let me be completely clear about this. I am horrible at math, but I'm pretty sure that if I have the total dollars and the percentage, I'm one calculator away from figuring out what the real dollars are.
Cam, were you going to add something?
Yeah, I know we don't have to decide this tonight, but I thought Dave Larson made a lot of sense. And as someone who looks at P&Ls and balance sheets all the time, and the more information you have at your fingertips, the better. It's just easier to make a decision instead of sending someone to a website. But I can't say I have a terribly strong feeling between either way right now.
One thing I'll say is they've been positive at putting up the omnibus budget. Now, maybe not many people actually go through it, but it's available to them to do it. to whatever degree they wish.
Sure.
Go down through it. And you can sit at town meeting if you've got your iPhone there with a website, with a browser, you can go figure, you can watch it as you go along. But I also think it's valuable to have it in Schedule A, Attachment A, because Attachment A is what people are at town meeting in paper looking at as they're listening to people talk about things and what's going on and what's happening. They can flip to that, or when they're voting on the Article 3rd Omnibus Budget, they can look at that as somebody's reading the numbers so that they understand what it is. I think it's great to provide more information. As you said, Cam, if you provide the information, it makes it easier for people to understand it.
So Dick, did you like the summarization at the department level then versus every line item?
I suspect that if we put it down as the department level this year, that we will get enough requests so that the following year we put it on every line item. And I understand what you're saying, Catherine, that it answers questions that people have. But I mean, that's where it is. If they got a question, work it out.
Well,
some people will ask the question. Some people will say, oh, yeah, it's only a small amount, whatever the case may be. But they should be able to understand it. And if we answer the questions, usually if you're at town meeting and people come up and ask questions and you can answer them clearly, they match what it says on the piece of paper. Yes, it did go up 5% because, yes, we had to go out for bid, and we have many years had an auditor that did it for that, but that auditor has now retired, and I think most of us know that those kinds of things happen, and when it happens, we went up 15%, so that's why it did. And it's good for people to understand that. Then they understand why there's pressure on their taxes. Maybe not that sole thing making all the difference, but at least they'll understand it. And if they see it on the line item that says healthcare, the percent, they can say, oh, wow, yeah, I understand why healthcare goes up, and oh, that's a big deal. That's a big number. So I'd go with it either way, but I suspect that sooner or later we're going to show it for all the line items.
How about the absolute dollar value, Dick?
I think the dollar value is helpful, but again, when this is shown as it should always be, when for example, the percent increase is 0, we don't put down 0. We simply put down nothing, or what I think is better is a dash. And you can write a formula very quickly to say put a dash in if it's equal to whatever else, so that somebody can eyeball very quickly, go down the list and see where there is something and that how much it is. Oh, there's a big number. Okay, that's 2 digits in the percent. All right, and how much is it? I think somebody said, what, Cam, you said if it's $50 versus $100 or something. I don't know. Yeah. Oh, okay. That's a $50 item. Oh, wait a minute. That one is $100,000. What was that? Oh, that's healthcare. Yeah. Okay. I think the more information we can put there without it looking cluttered is better.
And that would be my only fear with adding the absolute dollar amount, is that it will start to get really busy. I had told Kevin before I was partial more to the percentage on every line item. I know it might cause people to ask questions, but if anyone's looking that closely at each dollar value from 2021 to 2022, adding the percentage there is not going to raise any more questions than the absolute dollar values that they're looking at for the 2 years. So I just fear it would get pretty cluttered if we add the absolute dollar value. And I think the percentage is probably sufficient for them to be able to see, and comparing the $2 amounts.
In some cases, don't reinvent the wheel. I guess Dave mentioned that apparently Boxford does it. Kevin, would you give the town administrator in Boxford a call and ask them, how long they've been doing it, what they think of it, why they still do it? Sometimes you get some input from them. Maybe you have to call Alan Benson, not the town administrator. I don't know. But it's sometimes just a quick conversation, you may get something out of that. We've always hated it, but we still do it, or whatever the case may be.
I mean, ultimately, I'll say I don't have any strong feeling one way or another. I do believe that all information is good information. I just don't want to take an attempt to try to fix something and make it more confusing, I guess.
One other thought too, and I think this is, could be a really great thing, because we talk about trying to go more easily accessibly put the omnibus during the budget process. Maybe at the bottom of this, and I haven't talked to Catherine on this, so she's probably sorry, Catherine, but maybe we put on the bottom, for more detailed information regarding the budget, please visit the website.
Call town administrator's office.
Yeah. But there's, because I'm my personal opinion is I would love every single person in this town to read our omnibus when we get through the process, because it's fantastic. The work everybody puts into it, the select board, departments, the FinCom, it's a really incredible process, a lot of work, and the final product is really, it tells an amazing story of what we do. It's just you can't put that here, because then you're just going to lose everybody.
When I get this, what I would do is I would go, as just a resident, I would go down those percentage columns and see if anything looked out of whack for me. And I'd go, wait, 50%, what would that be? Oh, special education. That's not a problem. We can't control that. More kids are coming in. They have more needs. All right. And keep going down until I hit a number that I didn't like. I really like that percentage column. But anyway, that's some input to you, Kevin, at this point. You can go back and, as Dick suggested, talk to other town administrators to see what they're finding, see if it looks too cluttered with a dollar amount. We can talk about this later. It doesn't have to be resolved tonight, but and find out from Boyd, his thought on it too.
And with just generally, if we put something on the bottom, direct people to the website for more detailed information. Any red flag?
No. Okay. No.
Or my cell phone, apparently.
Home address.
Dick put his cell phone right there on the select board page, so you can put Dick's cell phone down there too.
All right. Thank you. And thank you, Catherine, for coming up with those prototypes. And thank you, Dave, for your input. All right. So moving ahead, the budget preparation schedule. Kevin, I'll go to you. I mean, it looks to me like this is very similar to what we did last year, just updated for dates for the new year.
I added a little bit more detail with our meetings that we have scheduled, and I added in there holds for the FinCom based on my conversation with Shay this week. And so it's going to be like every year. The schedule does move slightly from time to time as we go through the process. We try to keep it as tight to it as possible. It's a guide. But Catherine had a chance to review it. Tula, Beth Willis have all had a chance to review this ahead of the submission onto board docs today. The dates that are there for the tax recap and the budget submissions and everything like that is very similar to prior years, with slight movements from a place here or there, but it's very consistent.
Yeah, I can't believe this is starting Monday. FinCom starts to meet and the process is already starting up.
Capital is going to be sent out end of next week to all the department heads. And then within the first 2 weeks of October, I'll be meeting with all the department heads to discuss just what their priorities heading into the year are, collectively what our priorities are for the organization, how they should consider that as they build their budgets, talk about capital needs, and also just make sure that they're starting to think about the warrants. I have already a couple of times had a chance to speak in person at department heads around starting to already work towards the capital plan, the 5-year, look at confirming those numbers that they have in there with the vendors that they might have been getting quotes from, and look at what other needs there might be as well. So we're starting to move that process already.
Great. Any comments from the board, please funnel them over to Kevin. Okay, moving on, our last item is the CBA with the Police Reserve Association. Kevin?
So my hope is just to share with you this tonight. I know it came in today, so I don't expect any comments on it. Hopefully there are none. It's very, basically the MOA put in here. There's a couple of things I'll note. I deleted on the CBA, there was a section on the CBA table of contents, union dues and agency service fee on the old contract. When I went into the actual body of it, that didn't exist. It was deleted out, but the table of contents was not updated previously. So that's been updated. It wasn't in the MOA, but that's an example of something that was tweaked. And then the other item that I took a little bit of liberties on was under the compensation lines where we talk about the $500 signing bonus.
Yeah.
Added in there, it said October. That's an assumption that we would have this done Monday. And if for any reason it gets held up, I added in there just a couple of words saying, or the first pay period after ratification. So it just gives us, for any reason there's a delay, if we can't do it Monday, it gives a little bit of room that we're not in violation of the contract or having to revise it again. Other than that, should be basically everything that we had in the original. My plan will be for Monday, if there's any comments on this, if I've missed anything, we've had a few sets of eyes on this, but if there's anything anyone else sees or would like us to do differently, if you could let me know by Monday morning, similar to the cable contract. That way I can get this updated and over to the union for signature in quick order on Monday, so that we have the signatures for your vote on Monday if possible.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or input to Kevin on this at this point? No? Okay. Then unless there is anything else, Kevin, we are ready for our last motion. So anything final before we go?
Had a couple conversations with around the social media plan, just so everyone knows, starting to come up with some concepts and ideas around that. And then I would just mention that this week we had a meeting with the technical name of their committee is escaping me, but Gregor's group.
Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Gant. And we're moving forward with the donation plaques. They're finalizing those and then getting those done up for 3 locations. The Meg Black artwork, where there was a donation for that. The historical elements of the entrance into the building. And then there's one for the selectmen's room, which the committee is discussing. And I wanted to sort of flag it for you folks. If there's any issues with it, let me know. But we're no longer the selectmen. We're the board, select board. Select board room doesn't necessarily flow that great. So they were talking about changing it to the boardroom because there are multiple groups that do meet in there. It's not just the select board, but I said I certainly wanted to sort of just, there doesn't need to be a discussion because it's not an agenda item, but I wanted to kind of float that out there so you folks heard it and could sort of reflect on it. If there's any opposition to that name, or if there's an idea of what, because I don't think there's a formal name. I think it's just been referred to that historically. That's my understanding talking with people. So just a couple thoughts on that I wanted to make you aware of before they make any purchases on any signage.
The only thought I had on that, Kevin, I shared it with Kevin and I'll just share it with the group, is that I don't know whoever made the donation for that room, addressing it with them, because I think it was associated with a person who was a selectman previously. So there might be a sensitivity to the name change.
So on the plaque, as it's now, it would be the name of the room, whatever that lands on. It would say, in memory of, and it has the gentleman's name, and then it gives underneath that selectman and the dates he served. So even if the name above changes, his title when he served will still be maintained. That was discussed as well, and I felt strongly, and I know the group felt strongly, that that's sort of that's something sacred, I guess. If nothing else, that's his title. So
definitely.
Good.
I was just going to share one very quick tidbit, because I shared it with Kevin earlier today. But in the course of doing my real job, I got to watch select board or board of selectmen meetings from 3 different Massachusetts towns today. One of which featured the chair calling the police on the vice chair to remove her from the meeting in the middle of the meeting. A second where the chair, and this was a hybrid meeting where some people were in the room and some people were on Zoom, the chair desperately trying to mute another member because they wouldn't let a citizen speak. And a third one where a member of a select board went on a prolonged racist rant, all in Massachusetts. So all I want to say is I felt very strongly this morning that we have a very good board, because every day that I'm in the newsroom and I'm looking up what other boards of selectmen and select boards are doing, we're never coming close to making the news. So, we should pat ourselves on the back for that.
Thank you, Marshall. Fingers crossed we don't show up in one of those videos down the pike.
Well, listen, Lynn, if you want to call the cops on me in the middle of the meeting, we can make that happen at some point.
I'll be glad that Dick's got that on tape for sure.
All right, could I have a motion, please, to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
To second?
Okay.
Okay, roll call. Mr. Brown.
Aye.
Mr. Gant.
Aye.
Mr. Hook.
Aye.
And Ms. Bermudez is aye, so it passes unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Good night.
Thank you as well.
Good night.
Bye-bye.